Let me move on, and then we'll come back to you, Professor Yan. Now I have to ask for maybe 12 minutes or so. Dr. Lin Bin will tell us more about the U.S.-China competition, including the Korean Peninsula issue.
Firstly, I would like to thank our host for giving me this opportunity to explain my observation about the games in this region. I'm honored to share my views with our Thai colleagues, students, and colleagues from other countries. Actually, I'd like to talk about two different topics. One is about a so-called Chinese A to AD strategy, and the two is North Korea. So in the last 20 years, many American security experts, think tanks, the U.S. government, the U.S. military, they all believe that China has a strategy of A to AD. The A to AD strategy is that China is developing a military capability to stop the United States from entering this region. That is called anti-access and aerial denial strategy. They all believe that China has this strategy, China is working on this strategy, and China is moving forward in this direction. And some important U.S. policies are associated with this belief, with this accusation. And this accusation has a lot of influences in the U.S. Security policy making process. For example, the United States believes that the nature of U.S.-China relation is power competition. Everything China does is to increase China's power, influence, leadership everywhere. If you read the U.S. national security strategy, you will see that China is trying to increase its power leadership in this region and internationally, globally. And so that's one place we can see the impact of this theory, the A to AD theory. And another place, we can see the influence of this theory is the Indo-Pacific strategy. The belief, the theory behind it is that China is trying to increase its influence, its power in this region. So China should counter, the United States should counter that Chinese influence. According to my observation, China does not have the so-called A to AD strategy at all. No evidence. Let me check all the evidence. The American scholars have presented to us. Firstly, we cannot see any evidence in any Chinese document, not at all. No Chinese document discusses, how to stop the United States from entering this region. No, not at all. In 20 years, no American scholar has discovered any document on that. So another way the American scholars to prove this theory is that, China has some weapons. For example, China has some submarines. China has some intermediate range missiles. Those military systems can cover the region. So that's evidence. But I would say that China also has some other weapons, right? China has this kind of weapons. China also has other weapons. You cannot say, China only has these weapons. So this is important for China. The third evidence is that some Chinese military systems can be used for the purpose of A2AD. Right? You have missiles, and the missiles can be used for A2AD. So you must have that strategy. But I would say that these weapons can also be used for other purposes, not only for A2AD. They can be used for other purposes. So none of these evidences is strong. No, they're all very weak. Yeah. So if China does not have A2AD strategy, what strategy does China have? China explains very clearly. China has active defense strategy, not A2AD. I understand that our American colleagues perceive military threat from China. I understand that. But the perception about A2AD is wrong, right? It's all right for our American colleagues to have threat perception, but the threat perception in this way is wrong. So what is the Chinese way? Let's look at Chairman Mao Zedong's philosophy. Mao Zedong's philosophy is simply you fight your way, I fight my way. But these scholars, their theory is very different. Their theory is so-called mirror theory. If I were China, I would do this. I would do A2AD. So you must do A2AD. That is their philosophy. But Mao Zedong's philosophy is that you fight your way, I fight my way. Right? And Mao, clearly said that it is stupid to stop the enemy from entering my gate. The right response is flexible and mobile. So I believe, PLA, People's Liberation Army's tradition is something called outflank, bypass the enemy, not to, stop you from moving forward. That's stupid, according to PLA's tradition. So, I understand that our American colleagues, the U.S. government has a lot of anxiety about the growing influence of China. But, I do not believe that our two countries should have such kind of competition in a stupid way. China does not have the strategy to stop the United States from entering this region. And the United States should not worry about that. And but I should say that in China we do have some slogans to say that we are important. We should increase our influence. We should increase our power, and we should play leadership role in the world or in the region. I do not believe the Chinese people really enjoy that. The reason the Chinese people do not like China to play leading role in the region or in the world is because they do not like to pay the cost of leadership, no interest. But sometimes we say that is for domestic purpose. For example, I encourage my mother to use air conditioning, but she does not like to pay the cost. So I have to tell her, I'm so rich, I'm a millionaire, so just use as much air conditioning as possible. But by accident, my neighbors heard that, and they come to borrow money from me. Then that embarrassed me. Right? So I hope that you understand that. And let me use 1 more minute to explain the situation in North Korea. I believe that North Korea has hydrogen bombs, and the reliability of the technology may not be good. North Korea has intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can work, but I do not believe that they have reliable re-entry technology. And North Korea, every year can produce more enriched uranium for maybe 5 or 10 nuclear warheads. They try very hard to resume the production of plutonium, but not so successful. In last year, we had we have made a lot of progress. China has some important proposals. The first proposal was suspension for suspension. I believe that the United States and North Korea took that proposal. And the new proposal is 2 parallel tracks, 1 denuclearization, 2 peace building. I do not believe that the Chinese government has provided any details about the 2 parallel tracks. That's our fault. Our Chinese colleagues have not worked hard enough to provide technical details to our government. That's part of the reason. Another part of the reason is that we're not important in China. So the Chinese government does not listen to us. This is a problem in the United States too. In the United States, President Trump worries about big things. He does not worry about the technical details. But people who are good at technical details did not have good connection with the Trump administration. These technical experts, they know how to deal with the details of dismantlement of North Korean nuclear program, but they do not have traditional connection with this administration. So they work hard, but they do not have real influence right now. So now the situation is that we like to present suggestions for a good roadmap of denuclearization. And technical experts from China, from the United States, from France, from UK, from Russia, we talk to each other. I believe we have good cooperation, good discussion, good engagement, and we like, a cooperative way among P5 and North Korea and other countries, to work and to develop a good roadmap. We believe that we can do that. But unfortunately, in the United States, in China, and maybe in other countries, our voices are not loud enough. So by this chance, maybe our Thai government, and other government could help and could push this path from leaders summit to more constructive and more technical development of the roadmap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Li Bin. I agree that the A2AD anti-access area denial has been exaggerated. Yeah, and I think that there's not as much talk about it now. But before we leave today, I hope you can tell us a little bit about what in Southeast Asia, how should we perceive the artificial islands in the South China Sea, if not for A2AD. Now let me move to the issue of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and Dr. Li, in the context of FOIP, Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road, I think, is facing some challenges. Is there a plan B? There's an example in Thailand. There's a tripartite Thailand, China, Japan cooperation in the context of Belt and Road in a smart city in Rayong. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here to take part in this such an important forum and in such a well-known university on such a beautiful campus and with such a distinguished audience. Thank you so much. Since the time is very limited, so I want to more focus on Indo-Pacific because of my research background. I'm more on India studies and the Indian Ocean as well. So I want to answer this question, in 3 aspects or in 3 questions. What is Indo-Pacific? Why is Indo-Pacific? And how to manage Indo-Pacific? And I also would like to answer, maybe share with you my observation or understanding of the Chinese response to this Indo-Pacific. So what is Indo-Pacific? So up to now, I think the conception is still very blurry. I mean, it's not fixed. When you look at the conception, I think some believe, in terms of the domain, some believe it is Asia-Pacific plus India, and some believe that it is the Asia-Pacific plus IOR, in Indian Ocean region, right? So, and also for, to some extent, Indo-Pacific is a kind of corresponding to Eurasia, which means, the former focuses more on maritime sphere and the latter on continental sphere. And when you look at the Indo-Pacific, we can find a lot of composite terminologies, such as the Indo-Pacific strategy, Indo-Pacific region, Indo-Pacific diplomacy. So I think, generally speaking, I think the Indo-Pacific for the terminology is still not so clear. The second question is, why there's Indo-Pacific? I think for those, according to my own understanding, different countries have different interpretations of this Indo-Pacific. Even for those leading countries like the US, India, Japan, and Australia, who promote these conceptions very actively, their interpretations or expectations are very different. I think, for example, for India and Japan and Australia, I think for these three countries, they are more, they think, Indo-Pacific's more about their political identities in the changing, world politics. For example, for India, actually, my understanding is India, wants to be involved in the Asia-Pacific, because in the past, when we are talking about Asia-Pacific, there's no role for India, right? And also, I think for Australia, very similar to India, when there's the Indo-Pacific, Australia actually is in the heart of the Indo-Pacific, right? And also for Japan, I think Japan wants to, if there's an Indo-Pacific, I think there will be more room for Japan, to maneuver. And it will be helpful for Japan to increase its political and security influence in the region. But for the US, I think it's very different. For US, when you look at, the national security strategy, right? I think it is very clear. I mean, the US make it very clear in this document that Indo-Pacific is more about the great power competition. Because I think there's a sentence I quote, China, it said, talk about China. China seeks to displace the US in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think in this document, the US made it very clear. But according to, definitely, according to the Chinese, it's only a kind of allegation from the US side, And so how does China look at this Indo-Pacific conception? Again, I think up to now there has not been any official statement from the Chinese side. And generally speaking, I think the Chinese side take position on this Indo-Pacific still very neutral. I think there are at least two reasons for this neutral understanding from the Chinese side. The first one, I think actually Indo-Pacific itself is a kind of reflection of the rise of India and also the rise of China. As I mentioned earlier, let's Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific in the past does not include India. Now, when Indo-Pacific is here, India is definitely, included in the region. And when you look at China, actually China is, is more and more involved in the economic activities in the Indian Ocean region, right? So I think this Indo-Pacific, of course, definitely is a kind of reflection of the rise of China and India. And also, when you look at China's, more presence in the Indian Ocean, we can see on the one hand, there are more and more Chinese investment and more Chinese, business communities in the Indian Ocean region. And also, when you look at, there are some criticism or concerns about China's more presence, naval presence in the Indian Ocean region. But according to the Chinese, understanding is that China, for example, China's, naval activities in the Gulf of Aden is a kind of Chinese want to play a role to, take part in the global counter piracy campaign, right? So another reason for, for this Indo-Pacific from the Chinese perspective, I think is also a reflection of the increasing interactions and connections between the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean region. I think this region, the Indo-Pacific right now is the growth engine of the world, with many vibrant economies like ASEAN countries, like India, China, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. So I think it is a very important region which will play a very important role. But the negative side maybe is again, according to the American, national security document, definitely Indo-Pacific, is also maybe, a reflection of the increasing major power competitions in the region. So that's why there's a big concern from the Chinese, especially the academic community about this Indo-Pacific, and especially on that COP, because as His Excellency Dr.Surakiart, so, he mentioned, the court, it's revived after 10 years gap, right? And how this kind of court cooperation, what the direction, is it going to be a security alliance, right? So it's really a concern from the Chinese side. Due to the time limit, I want to go directly to my answer to the last question. So how to manage the Indo-Pacific? Actually, this question about how to maintain the peace and prosperity in this region. Again, it's only my personal understanding. I think, first of all, it is very important to reach a kind of mutual understanding between the major powers, especially the Greek powers, in the region. I think, first of all, both China and the U.S., we should really take serious about the danger of this competition, and I think especially for China and U.S., should make efforts to avoid misjudgment, and maybe some kind of CBMs should be developed between China and the U.S. And the key point is we should not let the great power competition or rivalry become true in this region. So it's in nobody's interest to have a great power competition dominate the region. The second point is that I think it is very important to observe the ASEAN centrality in the regional cooperation, as Professor Yan mentioned. Actually in the past, the ASEAN Plus mechanisms, have played a very important role in maintaining the security, the stability and peace in the region. So I think this kind of ASEAN Plus mechanism should continue to play such a role, and we should have explore a regional security architecture. We should make joint efforts in this direction. And thirdly, I think economic cooperation and integration should be promoted. I think without common development and prosperity, the security cannot be maintained. And I think more joint efforts needed to deal with the common threats, like the climate change, like the terrorism, poverty, and even another global economic crisis. Last but not the least, I think differences and disputes should be managed well and ensure peaceful resolution. And peaceful resolution is the only choice. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Li. CBM's confidence building measures, we haven't heard about that for a long time. I wonder, you mentioned Indo-Pacific, but the Americans officially, they talk about a free and open. They emphasize a free and open, FOIP. It's interesting that you just used the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN centrality, I think we will discuss a little bit more. Let me move to our last speaker, and then we have a lot to digest. Dr. Xie, you tell us a little bit more about China's partnerships, perhaps in a way. There's a lot of pushback against BRI. Partly, some perceptions have been that there's a lack of consultation between China and its partners.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to have the chance to discuss with all of the audience. Because of the time is limited, I just narrow my content. My topic or my question is that the swim between U.S. and China. Why I raise this question? I think that because we know that recently China have built a partnership with lots of neighbor states, but lots of states at the same time they are U.S. aligned, just like Thailand. So my question is when the tension or the debate between U.S. and China is clear more than more, which side will these partners choose? Or my question is that which kind of partner will support China more than U.S. and sometimes they will support U.S. more than China. I think that the background of the theory will be neglected here because I just mentioned that is the power transition theory and the alliance dilemma theory. I think that we needn't discuss it so much. But for the main part is my statistical analysis. In the models, I have built the panel data model for both for all of China's partners support and to the U.S. and to the China at the same time. So we can find that in my model, from model 1 to model these four model. In this four model, the dependent variable are their partners' support. That Thailand became the partner of China in 2012. And then here, in this model, my dependent variable is that partners support to China in the UN, and all of the independent variables can be categorized into three types. First is their relationship with China. Second is their relationship with US. And the third is that their own features, such as their polity, their GDP, and their military spending. And for all of these four models, the dependent variable is their China's partners support to US in the UN. So I will not analyze all of the index and the meaning of the coefficient, but my conclusion is clear. You can read this table clearly, and at last I found the first five conclusions. First, the support of U.S. in the UN is clearly negatively related to that of China. So we can find that maybe the Xi camp is more clearer than before, because the support to China and the support to US, they are negatively related, highly significant. Second, I think that economic interdependence have clear impact on the support to both China and both US. If the China's partner have economic interdependence with China, they will support China more. If they have clear the economic interdependence with US, they will support US more. But I have divided import and export. When China or US sells more money to the partner, they will not support US and China. But when the partners sells goods to China and the US, they will support more. I think maybe the logic is similar to the trade war here recently between China and the US. And the third conclusion is that political feature is not so significant. Just like what Professor Ye has mentioned, is not the new Cold War. In the new Cold War, political features such as ideology, politics, democratic or not, they have significant impact. But now, according to my analysis, we can find that here, the first column, the three independent variable polity, whether China's partner they are democratic or not, whether they are America's ally, will not significantly impact their support to China in the US. But China will stress the importance of those who have upgraded the partners with China. That means if they have not only built the partnership, but the partnership has been upgraded, their support will be more than those who are not upgraded. This is the third conclusion. The fourth conclusion is related about their support to US. To my surprise, I found that US ally, the ally of US at the same time, they are China's partners. They will not support US more than those who are not China's US ally. This is very strange. But if they are democratic, the democratic state, when they are China's partner, they will support US more than before. So I cannot understand why. The last conclusion is the influence of pivot strategy. Since the announcement of pivot strategy, we can find that China's partners will support US more than before. This is clear here. But also, to my surprise, they support China more than before. They choose to support both China and the US at the same time since the declaration of announcement of the pivot strategy. I think that maybe they want to choose to be the friend of both sides. They don't want to choose only one side. Hence my at last my because because of the visit of Thailand, I want to analyze China's partners in Asia. We can find that there are two groups. The first group, these are the data of the military arms sales from U.S. to China's partners. We can find that these we can divide them into two groups. First group can be the South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Others include Thailand, Indonesia, and Singapore, and other South Asia states. And we can find that if we divide them according to the military arms sales, we can find at the same time the support difference are also similar. The data are the difference between the vote difference between the partner and China. So the higher we can find if the number is larger, that means their position are totally different from China. So we can find that clear. The first group also they are South Korea, Japan, and Australia, and the other side they are Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore. So I think that why they are China's partners at the same time they can, according to their vote and according to the arms sales, they can be divided into two sides. My guess is that Thailand. This is Thailand's data of the vote in the UN. It's clear that the trend is similar. The blue one is their vote difference with US. The red one is their vote difference with China. It's clear that we have similar or clearly relation with Thailand in the US. We have maybe similar position, but Thailand's position in the US maybe they are different from the US. I guess maybe we can explain it from the economic interdependence, because according to my data, the total trade of the, also here the red one is the trade with China, the red one here is the trade with US, Thailand trade. Here we can find that in the 2005 that is the turning point. Since that point, the trade with China is higher than that of the US. So I guess maybe economic interdependence is a very important factor for the bilateral friendship between China and Thailand. And I guess maybe political issues will have not a very important impact. At the same time, we can find that the military support of US to Thailand is not as much as those of South Korea, Japan, other alliances. So we can find the choice of Thailand is clear. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The last slide about the trade actually is very indicative, because a lot of, there's a perception that since the military coup in 2014, Thailand has moved closer to China, but in fact the trade underpins that as well. Kun Kavi, could you give us a Thai view as a discussion, just a point or two or three in 10 minutes or so?
Yes. This is a very exciting time, because I have jotted down at least 26 topics. You can write 26 papers. And I think I will just highlight 2 or 3 points. I agree with our Chinese scholar in outlining the dilemma that the region is facing, the nature of the competitions in the global politics. Professor Xuetong's conclusion has a very big implication for the region. I pick up just one salient point. Professor Xuetong mentioned that now the focus is on US-China trade war or competition correctly. And I would go even further, that ASEAN is well prepared. ASEAN must go beyond this US-China competition. That is why I'm arguing that ASEAN is asserting itself. That is why Professor Li explanation of China view of Indo-Pacific is very crucial for the region because ASEAN is working to go beyond. But first, we must get our house in order. Professor Xuetong outlined a very good analysis, which I think has not yet taken hold in the region. It's very new, and I think it will take some time. But ASEAN already detect that this time around, ASEAN cannot stay idle. And I'm speaking not as a Thai, but I'm speaking as an ASEANite, ASEAN citizen that looking at China. At heart, in fact, I want to refer several times to Professor Xuetong because he mentioned that China is actually going outreach to the rest of the world. And Southeast Asia is one of the China, Qianmen, is front door actually. So China has to make sure that China traditional worldview, philosophy will create the kind of world that will be more acceptable. I'm arguing that China's led regional view is in the making in the region and is still the work in progress. And I would like to actually, I've been focusing my writing always on ASEAN-China relation. And the most telling vision of ASEAN-China, actually Professor Xuetong also well aware, is how ASEAN-China are working together to shape the relation vision in the up until the year 2030, which entered the second diamond era. The first diamond era, the first 25 years, was very good for China. But at the moment, whether ASEAN-China relation will serve as a basis in the future, in the absence of strong American role, this is very interesting, whether ASEAN-China together can create the so-called mini order, mini regional order. I'm talking about not only about code of conduct in South China Sea, even the common approach to Lanchang Mekong or Mekong cooperation in the making. These are something new that Professor Xuetong mentioned, which I like it very much, that it leaves to Southeast Asia to come up with idea, and we want to engage the Chinese. And ASEAN will engage the Chinese. I will answer, not only engage the Chinese, but also major power, and you will find it Indo-Pacific outlook. The ASEAN avoid, Professor Li, ASEAN avoid to use the word Indo-Pacific strategy. ASEAN actually come up with a very boring description they are using officially at the Chiang Mai retreat is ASEAN collective concept, Indo-Pacific outlook. But this title will be changed. And the title will be changed to depict that ASEAN has its own idea of the so-called Indo-Pacific after 10 years of lying in the tombs. But that is not important because ASEAN already decided to take up Indo-Pacific outlook. And ASEAN will use Indo-Pacific outlook as a strategy to engage the Chinese and broader major power competition. And I think this is why I'm arguing that from all the presentation, Professor Li Bin, Li and Xuetong Chi, it's very clear that ASEAN has to be more proactive, prolific. And this year, fortunately, under the Thai Loom, I'm not trying to over-exaggerate the Thai Loom. Thai chair is very important because it will set everything in motion, not only bilateral, bilaterally ASEAN, Thai-China relations are very good. And I would argue we would need a different conference that ASEAN-China is a laboratory for Xi Jinping new foreign policy. Any success or failure in the relation of this important country, just like in the early 80s, China used Thailand as a conduit to move southward into Southeast Asia. And now, the new era of Xi Jinping, new foreign policy, Thailand will be the big lab. I will I will stop on Thai-China relation. I will focus now on ASEAN-China. ASEAN-China has a lot of room to grow, but Indo-Pacific is in the making. ASEAN is fine-tuning Indo-Pacific outlook, and it will be finalized next month in Chiang Rai. Next month means March in Chiang Rai. And I think when it comes out, I am confident that China will support. Because Indo-Pacific outlook, according to ASEAN thinking, is to unify all the major power, all the so-called dialogue partner, and make them work together, not complete and destroy each other. So ASEAN will act as a facilitating or bridge building role, and you will see all the description under the various proposal by US, by Japan, by India, by Australia. ASEAN will leave them alone. ASEAN will come up with their own version and incorporate some of the key element and commonality into ASEAN own. But ASEAN will add its own flavor, the so-called ASEAN way. You can mention anything about ASEAN. So ASEAN will flavor. Dr. Titinan mentioned that the so-called freedom and openness. For example, ASEAN will not use the word freedom. ASEAN will focus on the concept of openness. So I will outline to you that they are look beyond the US-China competition. ASEAN has to get its act together. Otherwise, we will be at the mercy, at these two powers. I think to do so, ASEAN, number one, must strengthen rule-based order, the ASEAN way. And I think ASEAN will come out in Indo-Pacific very clearly that you have to respect international rule of laws and norms. Second, this one, I think, the so-called concept of openness. As I said, ASEAN will not take the whole concept of freedom and openness because some ASEAN countries a little bit doubtful of freedom because it could mean or leads into so-called intervention in the internal politics. I think that has been very clear. Number three is inclusiveness. Inclusiveness is very important, and I don't think people mention here. ASEAN, one of the key elements in ASEAN version of Indo-Pacific outlook is inclusivity. Inclusivity means we are not targeting any third country. So let's assure, I think China now should be clear and send strong signal to ASEAN that Indo-Pacific outlook, ASEAN version is not aiming at China at all. In fact, it's aimed at engaging China in all dimensions. I think that must be clear. And I think number four is, of course, I'm glad that Professor Li discussing about ASEAN centrality. ASEAN centrality must be earned. Of course, a lot of people talk about it. And this year, for the first time, you will see emerging consensus that ASEAN have to do more. In the past, the challenge the initiative coming from ASEAN from within. But this time, Indo-Pacific come from outside. So ASEAN has to respond. That is why it takes a long time. It takes over a year for ASEAN to respond. Now that ASEAN decide to respond, ASEAN cannot step backward. ASEAN will move ahead with Indo-Pacific outlook. But how it will work out depends on how the major power, the so-called dialogue partner, the member of EAS, will respond. And this year, Thailand already have all the plans. If everything's worked out fine, you will see the leaders of the member of the United Nations Security Council or the permanent converge in Thailand. Of course, UK leaders, France leader, the member of the UNSC, has already said yes to come to Thailand, but we don't know whether the future leader will be the same person or not. The leader from Germany also, the so-called developed partner, has already agreed to come. So in November, you will see Thailand turn into the land of security with all the world leaders. And this is important to show that as a chair of ASEAN, Thailand is thinking much forward, moving beyond the US competition with China. We want to engage the EU. It is very clear, but it's unfortunate that EU, up until today, has not yet been declared officially as strategic partner of ASEAN, which is very sad because after 40 years and billions of money invested in ASEAN, we fail. I think this kind of engagement will continue. So I think this much show you that ASEAN will move and engage the major power. We will not run away, okay? Finally, I think nobody mentioned this. I will mention the next big great game will be in mainland Southeast Asia. It will be in Mekong sub-region. And I think Professor Xuetong is right. The cooling down of South China Sea and Korean Peninsula will slowly move southward. And I continue to say that all these regions in southern China is China Tianmen. I will end here because of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. ขอบคุณครับคุณกวี Look, I just add a little bit to that, a little bit maybe perhaps a more sobering but somewhat ironic view of ASEAN. Kun Kavi has talked about ASEAN in a kind of an upbeat way, but ASEAN in fact has a lot of problems. The Thai chairmanship this year, we don't know how it's going to go. There's a lot of capacity, but there's a lot of uncertainty within Thailand. And ASEAN, as we know, since 2012 has been kind of divided. It's got a lot of issues to deal with. But yet it's ironic that the US-China competition has made ASEAN perhaps a necessary, I call it a buffer, a bridge, and perhaps a broker. Because I think that from what you said, Professor Yan, that China sees the importance of ASEAN even more with the US-China competition. The US less. And the free and open Indo-Pacific, when you say Indo-Pacific, is elastic, is broad. But when you say free and open, it's US in the driver's seat. Right? So ASEAN has tried to be autonomous by saying Indo-Pacific outlook, not strategy, but outlook. So it is a kind of a competition, even just for the terminology, what to call Indo-Pacific. The floor is now open. I'll just pose a couple of questions for Dr. Yan to begin with, and then I'll go to the floor. The unfortunate end of multilateralism. Unilateralism, bilateralism, multilateralism, perhaps in a regional context. This has been thought about, and some people are calling for kind of a concept of concept of powers, much like perhaps analogous to the 19th century after Napoleonic Wars. Is that the case? Is that the case? China-US, you mentioned, is not a conflict about ideology. This is true. It's not about communism and the free world. Yet there's a competing models of development and dynamism, where you have kind of authoritarianism at the same time as capitalist growth and dynamism, economic development. I tell my students that China actually is democratic. It's just within a party. It's not a multi-party democracy. But this is a kind of a inspiration, maybe a model example for a number of countries now, that you can have a kind of authoritarian shades of government with economic dynamism that can deliver growth. Two areas that I would like to cover that you can share your expertise before we leave today, especially Dr.Li. The South China Sea, what do we make of the weaponized artificial islands? How do we see it? Professor Yan, you're saying it's cooling down. Yes, but there are also some evidence that's also heating up, especially with US naval engagement, the FONOPs, the freedom of navigation, operational patrols, more frequent. And we didn't talk, you didn't mention the Mekong region, which is very near to us. We're very concerned about how the Mekong river resources will be governed in what kind of framework going forward. So I'll just leave that on the table, and you can perhaps help us shine some light on it. And then I'll open the floor to questions and comments.
Add to Kun Kavi on Indo-Pacific, and I think that ASEAN is now working on this interpretation of Indo-Pacific, which will not be the same as the Americans or the Japanese or the Indians. In fact, I have been thinking about this, and I think we will not use the term outlook because it's not a good one. Let me propose that a new term for ASEAN perspective on Indo-Pacific is that Indo-ASEAN perspective, because ASEAN is in fact in the middle of Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and we want to put the word ASEAN into it because ASEAN centrality, and we want to maintain. I agree with all the key elements of Indo-Pacific that could be mentioned about inclusiveness and the role of ASEAN, centrality and connectivity, and I want to propose here that I think the term that maybe Thailand will propose maybe at the Chiang Rai is Indo-ASEAN Pacific, which will be our interpretation and our presentation about Indo-Pacific. We want to engage all major powers, including European Union, in order to bring about a peaceful coexistence as well as a peaceful solution.
Thank you, Ajahn Titanan, and to all the speakers of today. My question is regarding the Mekong region, which has been touched on today, and that is how does the panel see the Langsang Mekong Cooperation, the LMC, and how might that impact on ASEAN centrality in the future? Because as we know, the LMC does not have all 10 members of ASEAN in it, but really is just the mainland ASEAN countries. So my question is, how do you see the LMC impacting on the future of ASEAN centrality?
Maybe we can talk about the Langshan Mekong a little bit, and South China Sea, Dr. Li. There's a single document now, ASEAN China, and you mentioned it's cooling. Is it really cooling? And perhaps you can address what are the weaponized artificial islands, how should that be perceived? I also would leave this about the BRI. Do you think that the BRI is now being pushed back? There's a lot of some cancellations, some postponements, Malaysia, Maldives, Sri Lanka. There's so-called the debt trap, that this recipient country's partners are concerned about. And I'll leave another trap, the last trap for Dr. Yan at the end. Perhaps you'll be the last speaker about the Thucydides trap. A lot of what you talked about is really about this grand strategy, the grand canvas of the major power competition. Are we headed for a clash? How could it be avoided? And there's a Thucydides trap thesis that when a rising power becomes inexorable, then the declining power would try to defend itself, or there would be kind of an inflection point and they would clash. So perhaps would you be able to address South China Sea a little bit, Dr. Li?
Thank you for your very good question. Actually, there are two elements in your question. One is about the island, the construction on the island, and what is the relation between the construction and A2AD. That's one. The other is, what is the situation, whether or not the tension is become more, hot or or more cool in this region. And then we address these two elements separately. Think about the whole South China Sea. Right? The South China Sea, the water, the size of this water is about the size of the whole Chinese land territory, right? That big. And there are about 20, 30 islands in the water in South China Sea. So each of these islands is as big as a shopping mall. So on the whole land territory of China, there are 20, 30 shopping malls. You want to use these 20, 30 shopping malls to stop people from entering the land territory of China? No. You cannot do it, right? No, you have too few places for that purpose. So I agree, China has constructions on some of the islands, but I simply did not believe that would have any significant contribution to any A2A capability. It's too small and too few of this element. The first element. The second element is what is the nature of China's action. I do not want to discuss South China Sea directly. I'd like to explain to you another case. That is how China and Russia solved their territory dispute. China and Russia began to seriously talk to each other on their territory disputes in 1990s. So in the whole process of the negotiation, China was a rising power, Russia was a declining power. We could use this case to see whether or not China was aggressive, and China demanded more territory, China pushed Russia back. Well, we could check that, but apparently, China was not aggressive. The two countries peacefully, I believe, they had good cooperation in the negotiation. And for the last piece of this dispute, that is an island. China believes that is part of China, Russia believes that is part of Russia. And the final solution is to cut that island half by half. The north half belongs to Russia, the south half belongs to China. That is a very good compromise, right? So we could use that model in South China Sea. So I did not believe that China would be aggressive when it has negotiations with its neighbors. But if some other countries, they get involved, they are not part of this region, they get involved, China would worry that if China shows flexibility, and the other countries will see, look, China is so soft, let's bully China. So that's kind of Chinese traditional concern. So China has to pretend, I cannot be flexible. So I would suggest China's neighbors talk to China directly and peacefully, and we use the model of China-Russia negotiations for solving the territory dispute. We have good future, I believe. Right? We have a good example there about Russian-Chinese solution on that territory dispute.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Li, what do you think about Indo-ASEAN Pacific? Would that be a better conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific?
I think it's a good proposal, but maybe from the position of ASEAN, I mean maybe it's a kind of consideration for yourself. But maybe I would like to move away. I would like to take two questions. The first about the Lancang-Mekong cooperation. Actually, I don't think it has anything to do with the centrality of ASEAN, because the centrality of ASEAN is more about the regional security architecture. It's my understanding. For Mekong, for the LMC, I think it's more about maybe how to manage the trans-border or the international river, right? Actually, when you look at those international rivers in the world, there are always the contradictions between the upper riparian states and the lower riparian state nations. So my understanding is that this cooperation actually is a way for the countries, along the river to find a way how to, manage our contradictions and how to make joint efforts to best use these resources and serve all the people along the river. So that is my understanding. My second, I would like to take the question about the BRI and the so-called debt trap. Because my understanding is that, actually BRI, there's a lot of misunderstanding. Even back in China, what is BRI? What BRI is? Actually, I think a lot of misunderstandings and different interpretations. I think actually I think for China, what BRI is, I think first it is about more economic opportunities for the Chinese business community. Because I think it's a kind of continuation of that going abroad, for the Chinese, companies, right? And secondly, I think it is more about the globalization. It's a process, regarded by many, I think, including, some international observers, that this BRI will promote the globalization. And thirdly, I think it's also about China, how China can provide the public good, because in the past years, there's a call from the international community to, when China becomes stronger, you should have, take more international responsibilities. So maybe China, want to give a kind of response to this international call. So my understanding, when you look at BRI for 5 years, I think there are some achievements. Definitely, there are also challenges. For the achievements, I think the biggest contribution may be the vision of connectivity, because although the United States and some other countries, there are some criticism of this BRI, but they are also talking about connectivity. Even for the Quad, I mentioned, they are also talk about how to build up the connectivity. So I think maybe BRI made a kind of contribution for the mindset. And also, BRI, also provides some kind of new financing mechanism, such as the AIIB. I think it's ended, how to say, the framework. And also, I think it's, of course, it's definitely helped to strengthen China's relations, bilateral economic cooperations with recipient countries. And of course, there are challenges, as I mentioned, there are a lot of misunderstanding. Maybe, what is, BRI? I think, first of all, it's not a Chinese project. Actually, it's a kind of international platform. It should be, must be, inclusive. And also, I think for those, the so-called debt trap, the specific criticism, my understanding is that when you talk of the trap, there must be intention at first, right? Definitely, I mean, from the Chinese side, there's no such kind of intention to have, to entrap other countries, And I don't think at the moment China, we have such a big population, and we have to provide at least, each year we have to provide 12 million jobs for the, young people. So I think there's a lot of mission for the government to do at home. So I don't think China really in a position to entrap other countries. But the problem really there, I would like to use the debt problem or the debt issue, which means, after the 5 years, we have to see that there really exists some kind of debt problem. It is not because the intention, because of, I think BRI too much focus on the infrastructure. And also those infrastructure are so huge, I mean those so many mega infrastructure. So we have to take into account or pay enough attention to this, how can make this mega infrastructure or investment in this mega infrastructure, sustainable. I think it's really a problem we have to pay, enough attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a good distinction, by the way. The intention of entrapment, the absence of it, it means that the debt is more incidental. It's not intended to begin with. Dr. Xi, China and partners. How does China win more friends and partners in the world, based on your research?
Yeah, I think maybe time is limited, but I think that just like friendship of ordinary people, I think that when we help others, and I guess we can gain real friends. So I think that to be a responsible state, I guess that maybe in the future China should do more responsible to the duties to help the regional peace. I guess that may be the most important. And I think that although American stress that the strategic competition, I guess maybe they are totally influenced by the Cold War's history. I think that China will not suffer this kind of idea. So I think that when China do more contribution to the regional and world peace and cooperation and economic interdependence, I guess maybe it will be better for us to gain the real partners.
Okay, thank you very much. We come to you, Dr. Yan, for the last couple of minutes of final remarks from you. Will the uneasy peace be maintained? What's necessary for it? We have had a lot of issues, a whole gamut. But perhaps a broader picture that you can leave us with from the Chinese perspective.
Well, I think this question actually related to the Tusi tribe. And this term is so popular, and even in China, many people use the tribe to describe anything. Seems everything we're moving into the age and full of the tribes, so we don't know how to escape from it. And actually, if we want to understand what is Tusi tribe first, and then we know, and we do not need to worry about it. And the Tusi tribe, based on the history, that means the two great powers compete for the dominance will be inevitably involved into direct war between them. Direct war means, and the two sides use their comprehensive capability and mainly rely on military capability to fight against each other, destroy the other side. Well, if that's the definition, if it's what the term Tusi tribe refers to, it even didn't happen during the Cold War. The 40 years of Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union never went to any war directly against each other, but they just do the proxy war. Okay, if the proxy war is not inconsistent with the term of a Tusi tribe, then we will ask, how can that kind of thing happen? And which even didn't happen during the Cold War. So from my understanding, the nuclear weapons has already played a very important function, maintain the world peace, means keep the world from suffering of a world war. World War I, World War II, that's a great disaster. But then after 1945, human beings developed nuclear weapons. And that kind of, the danger of that kind of war is declining rather than the increasing. So that means if China and US do not fall into the direct war, even they are going to fight a proxy war, and we will not fall into the trap of Tusi. Okay, that's the first. So I think the nuclear weapons if the nuclear weapons can maintain the peace for during the Cold War, it definitely will play the same function, and in our age, and for the next few decades. And as long as there's no defense weapon system can nullify the nuclear strategic weapons threat or the capability of destroying the human being, as I think we're safe. So what it means? It means that in the future we will see the competition between the great powers, but it will be less militarily violent than during the Cold War, rather than more. Besides nuclear weapons, now we have globalization, we have a lot of other things help to prevent the direct war between the great superpowers. The second, about what's the nature of the competition. From understanding the nature or the character of the competition between China and the US can never be different from that between the Soviet Union and the US. It's the competition for global influence. It never changed. But the form and the content of the competition will be totally different. So if we will look at human history in the last 5,000 years, the nature of the competition between the major powers never changed, but the content and the form changed continuously, never stopped. So what I mean? I mean that this time, the competition between China and the US will not repeat the model competition between Soviet Union and the US. During the Cold War, US want to proliferate American's model, the capitalist model. And the Soviet Union want to proliferate or expand the socialist model. Well, from my understanding, this time, and if US still have that dynamic or motivation to promote American's model in the world, China obviously do not have that motivation, have no that dynamic. Many people said what our leader said during the report of the 19th Party Congress. China set a new model for the rest of the world. But very soon, less than 30 days, the same leader and at the World Party Congress said that China will never export model to the rest of the world. We do not. Because we realize that, and some Americans, or at least the members of the Truman's administration, want to launch a model competition with China. And then at the Chinese side, they said, okay, if you want to do it, just do it. We have no interest in it. We do not want to involve in this ideological competition with you. And so, since then on, Chinese government have clearly stated to the world. First, China have no interest to export models. Second, we don't think our model are suitable for others. And the precondition for Chinese model is the rule of Chinese Communist Party. Without any country will establish, ruling party will become the Chinese Communist Party. If no country has the Chinese Communist Party rule that their own country, our model is not suitable for them, because the precondition for the success of this model is a communist rule, right? So even today, if you look at our neighbors, and except Vietnam, Laos, and South Korea, there's no communist ruling party. And even in our neighbor countries, there are even no communist opposition party, right? So this model is so unique. So if you look at what the Chinese academia doing research, they're doing about the specific character of Chinese model. So this specialty means, and it's not suitable for anyone else. It is only for China. The last thing is about how can we push forward and the multilateralism in the Southeast Asia. And just now, a professor suggests that ASEAN can play a very important role. I totally agree with that. But then we must give keep in mind the state and international organization play different functions. An international organization can never play the same role as nation states. That's why the EU cannot keep the United Kingdom in it. They cannot prevent Brexit from occurring. So if ASEAN want to play a role of the international organization, maintain the balance between China and the US, or for the regional stability, that really makes sense. But if ASEAN can engage any country, I think that's maybe too ambitious. And for instance, if any international organization want to engage any power, and what they have to, they must open their membership to that country. Like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, when they engage the India into this in this organization, they open the membership to India and Pakistan. Then you can engage that power. But I doubt ASEAN will open its membership to anyone. Not only China and even Australia, I don't think that ASEAN will open the membership. When ASEAN cannot open the membership to anyone, I think it's very difficult for ASEAN to play the role of the engagement. Second, and ASEAN adopted the concept of the inclusiveness. I think this is a very good concept, and this principle of the inclusiveness used by many international organizations and many countries. But then we must notice that inclusiveness is also the double-edged sword. It has both positive and negative roles. On the one hand, inclusive, the principle, can have more countries to join you to support the same ideas and to put forward the shared opinions or shared goals. On the other hand, this principle of the inclusiveness and also make these ideas or the implementations inefficient. For instance, when Maha suggests that we establish East Asia Economic Community, and it was beaten by the US with the principle of inclusiveness. They said, no, you should not only have East Asian country as a member of this idea, and you must have me as a member of it. So that when US join in and everyone understand that, you can do nothing. So then finally we set up the APEC. APEC have more countries. It's much more inclusive than the East Asia community. Then what? And APEC by now, from my understanding, they even cannot reach any symbolic joint statement last year. And APEC have signed, reached agreements for more than 10 years, but now you find that they even cannot have a symbolic, very hollow joint statement and to sign by everyone. So what I mean, I said that when we concerning the regionalization or regional cooperation, must keep the balance between the openness and the efficiency. Otherwise, the too open, then you cannot achieve anything substantial. But if you're too close, and the influence will be limited. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yan. This has been a tour de force. It has been comprehensive, covered many issues, a lot of ground. I would like to thank Ambassador Piriya Kempon again for facilitating, bringing our Chinese experts here. We're over time, so please join me in thanking all of our speakers, Dr. Yan Xuetong, Dr. Li Bin, Dr.Li, and our next event will be next